Hello and welcome to The Public Good. This is Dace James with Partnership for the Public Good, or PPG, which has over 350 organizations partnering with us as a locally based think tank creating policy for community-based change. We are so excited every week on Tuesdays to be giving you new episodes with community partners and just displaying work that's going on in our community. This is going to be one of our first episodes after the federal election results. And so we just want to acknowledge and hold space about those results and letting people process those results. And we also want to be sure that we're focusing on the local level work that continues despite whatever's happening on federal level of government. And so I'm really excited to have a friend of mine here today with me, Hagar, from the New York Immigration Coalition, to talk a little bit about where immigration policy is and where it's going, despite whatever's going on. And so I'm going to hope that this is a series of a few different topics that we can get into about work that continues despite whatever's going on in the world, because there are a lot of organizers, a lot of organizations working on a lot of great initiatives. And we want to be making sure we're highlighting and uplifting that work and not just doomsday. So let's talk about it. But I'll let Hagar introduce herself really quickly.
Yeah, thank you, Deja. My name is Hagar Hafez. I'm a manager of organizing and strategy at the Western New York area for the New York Immigration Coalition. We're a statewide organization that does advocacy and policy pushes for all New Yorkers, but also with an emphasis on immigrant New Yorkers.
Absolutely. And so I just want to ask you specifically, like, how did you find the New York Immigration Coalition? How did you get into this work? Because I think a lot of our listeners and different partners and community members, have a lot of issues that they care about, but they're not sure what actionable steps they can take to contribute towards causes or things like that.
Yeah.
And so how accessible do you feel kind of like the organizing community is? I talked about this a little bit with Leighton when he was on for our city of Buffalo.
Okay.
But I'm just curious, sorry. It's like I always get personal a little bit, but like, how do you feel like you've entered the immigration advocacy space? And how do you feel about working for an organization like the New York Immigration Coalition?
Yeah. I mean, I came here to the U.S. in 2015. And, as an immigrant myself, I was served by a local immigration organization. And that's how, my work in immigration in general started. And I worked on multiple capacities. So I was a case manager at some point, worked in a school impact program with refugee kids at some point. The programs that are for unique cases that involve domestic violence or single mothers or things that are more complex. I've also done a refugee health program. So multiple capacities and roles. And I kind of always knew I wanted to be an immigration advocate. But at the time, I thought, I'll be very frank with you, I thought it would be too arrogant of me to step into a space of advocacy when I only know my own immigration story and not so much the nuance and the different backgrounds and weight you could come with as an immigrant. Also, each of our journeys are so different. And our experiences based on our demographic is very different. So I took the time to study the stories and the cases and make real connections in order to see, because service providers really do see the gaps in the system and the holes firsthand. And before I step into a place where I'm talking about the policies that impact that, I really wanted to get a really good grip on daily lives.
That's really valiant of you, because I don't think a lot of people in the forefront think about, I need to step out of myself and my own experience to be able to advocate for others. I think that's really interesting, because I worked also for New York Immigration Coalition for a time. And I think when I went into it, and similarly to you, that I had a background in work, interning with future resettlement agencies or different things like that. And I felt like I very much saw one side of Buffalo when I went home in my personal life with my family. And then I realized as I worked or just went through the community that, oh, like people are experiencing even Buffalo or Western New York in an entirely different way than I am. And for me, that it was like a wake-up call type of thing, whereas I think it sounds like, interestingly, for you, it was like an introspective, like, I have to consider this before I enter, certain spaces. And I don't necessarily think everybody does that. So I was just commending you on that. But as you are advocating for a plethora of communities, because I think people, and especially in America, immigration is like a blanket statement, right? And people think of certain communities and don't understand, like, even the nuance between immigrant and refugee. Like, there's a whole difference there that people don't necessarily understand, or when they see someone labeling them a certain way. How do you feel about those labels and how we kind of need to reimagine the way we talk about immigration in the United States? Like, how should we be talking about it versus how we're talking about it now?
That question.
Yeah.
Never been asked something like that before.
I think it's really like, I feel like most Americans are like, oh, Mexico, or, there's or South America. Maybe they're more, I think early 2000s, it was Mexico. Now they're like, okay, yeah, there's Venezuelans and other things too. Maybe Americans are waking up a bit, but it's still not encompassing the whole picture of what immigration really is, or the experience then of those said immigrants, because I think, Americans are very much on the defense about it, and not really considering why are people coming here and what's happening, and why may or may not the U.S. have a hand in why they're here. So I so separated. So how do you think we kind of bridge that a little bit more in mainstream media, things like that?
Yeah. Oh my God. I mean, there's so many layers to your question.
Yeah.
Deja, and you addressed like some pieces that I was already going to bring up, which I really love, because yeah, your question like framed my answer too. But I think there's parts to the answer. For one, the part where you talk about the why people come here, right? I think that is a very important part of the discourse on immigration, is zooming out a little bit and then seeing like, why would someone risk their whole life, their whole well-being, put themselves in such dangerous situations, crossing borders and oceans, in certain cases, or spending years in a refugee camp, clean water or education, or, why would someone endure like all of these paperwork and processes? Like, there has to be a very strong reason if someone is willing to take that road, that is ambiguous almost, because your journey is always unpredictable when you're an immigrant. And with that in mind, thinking about immigration as something that is so natural to humans and has always happened, always occurred, and will forever occur, for many reasons, right? But one being like climate and conflict being the primary reasons why people leave their home. Because if you really think about the concept of home, which is something that I take with me in my work, is like, we all have an attachment to our homes. We have careers that we care about. We have a life and family that we care about. To be stripped away with choice or without choice from those things that we're attached to and used to takes a lot of courage. And so taking the time to empathize through stories, or looking at the source of the why of why people would risk everything to start anew. You're starting a new career in a country where you don't know the language, or you know it a little bit, with kids, where parents come here and parents are the source of, how you say it, like safety in a child's life, but all of a sudden the parent is reluctant and worried, and cannot provide that safety for their children. I guess all of this to say is, yes, source is very important, and climate and conflict will be ongoing forever, unfortunately. I mean, I hope not. But another piece of it with the blanket thing is understanding that there's immigrant, but then there's humans, different humans in different life stories and lifetimes, right? Someone can come here as an elderly person, someone can come here as a child or a baby, and they all have different stories. Someone can come here with a disability or a sexual orientation that makes their story different too. So then you have the piece of like people's statuses are different. You could be a refugee, an asylum seeker, and an undocumented person on a special immigrant visa, on a humanitarian parole. Like there's so many different statuses. And then under that, there's so many different stories under that status. I don't know if that answers your question, but
I think it does. I think for you, it's about centering the human experience. Like that's what we need to focus on. You know, I think by making an archetype of the quote unquote immigrant, it dehumanizes the person behind the phrase or title, right? And it's really easy, I think, for Americans to fall back on that kind of American privilege thing. I think most of us will never, well, maybe with climate issues, we will a little bit more now, but never know about having to flee our home or, you know, the last civil war we had was nowhere near any of our lifetimes for us to know what going through like a domestically based land-based conflict is or things of that nature. And so I almost think we can't empathize almost like there's like this desensitization of that kind of feeling towards that experience because maybe Americans struggle conceptualizing that or something. It blows my mind. Do you know what I mean? How disconnected people can be, even, you know, second or third generation immigrants themselves, which is really what's like really gotten to me over the last few years of discourse is like the societal shift of even like other people of color not wanting to identify or understand the experience of others coming in. It's mind-blowing to me.
Well, and I know it sounds weird, but I have some empathy towards that because I feel like, for one, the idea of displacement, if we really sit down with it and like toy with it, everybody in this country has been displaced on some level. And fast forward to the communities that are divided, like we already know that power is in our unity as oppressed people and intersectionality and its importance. Like these are things that we all recognize, we all see. But I think there's a lot of factors at play here. And some of it is, yes, you're far removed from that reality. And some of it is you have your own problems going on at home and mouths to feed, right? And a 9-to-5 or multiple jobs to keep a basic level of income for your house. And I think, you know, I recognize sometimes that like it is hard to stay informed. It is hard to give out compassion or empathy or be involved in a movement for somebody else that where it doesn't impact your life. So I feel like, you know, I've tried my advocacy to not sell the idea of please empathize with us, but rather like, let's see our community. Let's see everybody in our community and let's see how like all as one community, like our divisiveness will lead to our demise, and how my neighbor who might be impacted a different way than I am, right, I still need to advocate for. And that kind of takes us back to the blanket statement about immigrants and the nuances of what an immigrant could be, because within the immigrant community, there is that divide too, with like where you came from, what your color is, what your orientation is, right? Like not always do people empathize or see each other as equals either.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a collective struggle, to be honest.
Yeah. And I think it goes to like larger power structures, you know, at the end of the day, divided, we have less power and it's easier to kind of control course or whatever. And it's just very gracious of you And you're like teaching me a lesson because I'm like, shame on these Americans. How are we like this? I get really frustrated. But for the way that you approach it, it makes me kind of look at it a little bit differently and acknowledge the fact that there are a lot of like American domestic issues happening. And I think, right now, a lot of those are being emphasized or kind of weaponized against other people because we're just aiming at the wrong target, and I hate to be able to solve those issues.
Blaming each other.
Yeah. And it's to kind of keep us busy and distracted. You know what I mean? So I think that's very interesting. And I think that lends itself to another way we can kind of reconceptualize how we're talking about immigration and social issues, and that immigration isn't a siloed issue from racism or classism or capitalism or any of those things. Like they're all interconnected.
Literally, like our society as a whole, we don't live in silos. And, when an immigrant is targeted, you best believe that there is a racial disparity in who is targeted and who's the most vulnerable. So, yeah, it is. I think the way I look at it is personally as like it's never like a trauma trying to one-up trauma. It's like, our communities, all of them have faced different types of pressure or oppression. There's multiple people who are mostly impacted and like vulnerable in our community, and I think that's where the solidarity is so important. And it's not just like a happy-go-lucky solidarity. It's a solidarity where like the impact on another community and how it impacts your own community as well. Like that's the thing that I think some of us, at least I would be happy if some people get at some point, is like an attack on another community at some point is an attack on my community.
Yeah, it's going to come around eventually. It might be one group today. It could be your group tomorrow, and we just need to stop the attacks and the source in general. I just think that's so powerful. And the other thing I wanted to bring up in terms of what we're talking about is like, I've seen that term, especially, post Trayvon Martin and, different kind of Black Lives Matter movement things. When Black people felt like finally other people of color are trying to possibly stand in solidarity with us. But then, they lasted a few years and then it got a little bit, in troubled waters, and it turned into, and I think the term that I saw on Twitter all the time at the time was oppression Olympics. So it was like, oh, well, we go through this as, brown people, we go through this as Black people, we go through this as Asian Americans. And, especially when COVID came up and Asian Americans were like, well, we face racism too. Hello. And a lot of people, even admittedly me, did not realize, and I think, so I just think that bridging those gaps is so important, and having discussions like this is so important. And that's why I appreciate your friendship so much, because I feel like I always learn so much from you, and you're just from a community that's like so different, but also so much the same this time. And that just illuminates so much for me. I feel like my brain neurons are always firing every time I talk.
I always tell you, like, you are super intelligent, and I always feel like so humble to be in your presence.
Oh, I was so nice.
But that what you're saying, right, is it's the movements, and I think something to in consideration of what you said, like movements do have to be consistent, and our effort to be there for one another as a community doesn't always have to be when we're under attack. We have to be less responsible, in my opinion, responsive, in my opinion, and reactionary to oppression, rather than having consistent efforts to systemically change that oppression.
Yeah. I totally agree. And I feel like that's exactly why I got to advocacy work, because I'm like, I see the systems. How can I change them now? And for me, in college, I did a lot of protests, and I think that there's space for that. There's time for that. And we have to do that as well. Everything has to happen at once. But I'm like, who are the ones that are actually going into these rooms and dismantling or taking these positions in government, doing something different, right? And until I kind of came to PPG and NYC, it was more of like we're just working with what we got and what we're given rather than trying to like impact changing those systems. And so I think that's why for me, I think the work at NYC is so powerful because especially now, and it's not just an American thing. I mean, I've seen the news in the UK and Europe and EU and like all these immigration, because like you said, migration has always been a thing. And it's like, when you talk about it, like in the caveman or Mesolithic times, it's migration, right? Like, but now in modern times, all of a sudden immigration, and there are these borders and there's the rules and constraints that we've, as a like human society, put on. Yeah. And, we're trying to make ourselves fit into, boxes that, we shouldn't, I think, at the end of the day. But to the point of how we're changing systems, I would love to know how NYC and you are working as you've always been working. I want to reiterate, these aren't new initiatives, the years and years of work, policy development. How is the work continuing for you and the New York Immigration Coalition in terms of protecting immigration rights and the rights of really all citizens at the end of the day, especially with what's going on now? Like, anybody can potentially be in danger. So how are we making sure people are safe?
100%.
Yeah.
I am so proud to be a part of the New York Immigration Coalition because, just seeing the work and being part of that work of where I know we are going to continue working to uphold those very strong values that are human-centered, to be there for immigrant New Yorkers and also all New Yorkers who are under attack. But also gearing up for it and, creating community power and solidarity and creating spaces for trainings and community resources. Like, one of the things, there are so many ways that the New York Immigration Coalition is ready to, fight for people's rights the coming years, but one that has always existed and under anyone it will continue to exist. And that's kind of like just what we were just talking about, is like the consistency, right?
Yeah.
And we are always, I think, in a movement, like with the systemic changes and the little laws here and there that we pass. I think what we're doing is empowering folks more and more to have the safety to eventually be able to create like a more equitable system.
Opening doors for people.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you, for example, don't have to worry about food today or getting your paycheck, like, you'll then have time to think about
for having services in your language or educational access or anything like that.
Literally, yeah. That's how you empower people. But back to that point. So we have Know Your Rights materials. We also have Know Your Rights session. The Know Your Rights materials can be accessed on the New York Immigration Coalition website. We have community toolkits in English and other languages. We have presentations. Anybody could access those. If you go on our website and you go to the resources, I think it's the second one, if I'm not wrong. So that, I think, would be, like, in general, a community resource that, like, you can access to help out your neighbors or know someone who was impacted, right?
Yeah.
There's also other ways, like recently, foreign in the elections, we have done a local Western New York immigration solidarity rally of where we had folks from different communities. The immigrant community in Buffalo is so rich, and it was just a Buffalo thing, and people came together and showed that love towards each other, and we heard community members who were impacted speak of. And on top of that, we obviously are trying to pass our priority legislation, and New York for All is more important than ever right now.
Can you tell people a little bit about what New York for All is?
Yes, happily. So New York for All would be a legislation that would stop state and local police from colluding with ICE and sharing people's immigration information and thus funneling them into deportation and detention, breaking up families, creating a lot of unsafety.
Can we talk a little bit about deportation centers too? Because I think for some people, it's like, well, if they're not supposed to be here, they're not supposed to be here, and that's our process and that's our system. But can you just talk about a little bit about how broken it is and what deportation, even like, I think a lot of people don't know that as close as Batavia, we have a detention center,
Right.
and conditions and different things are a problem. So what is it like if somebody does get caught up with ICE?
Yeah.
Why are we trying to protect people?
Yeah. So, well, Western New York specifically, but also New York State, being 100 miles radius from the border, is a little more dangerous. And also having, like you said, Batavia is the only federal detention center in the state, and it's right here. And, oftentimes when people think about detention, deportation, they think, folks who don't have documentation. But it is a threat to everybody, right? Like if you're an asylum seeker, if you're a refugee, certain things can lead up to that.
And my she's pipe up, like you said. I mean, it depends on if the cop is having a bad day that day or believes you or doesn't believe you or thinks you look suspicious or not. And then all of a sudden you're gone from your family. And by the time they figured out you may or may not have lost your job,
Literally,
it's just, it totally upends your life just simply based on their sentiment. And it's deplorable to me.
Exactly. And when people so the collusion usually happens like when police will stop you, right? So when a police stops someone, just by the looks of it, can't really tell if someone is an immigrant or not, really. And then there's that racial disparity aspect to it of like who gets stopped, and then the questioning of like your immigration status and everything like that getting shared. But just putting into perspective like the scenarios of where these collusions happen, is sometimes people are just trying to go to work or pick up their kid from school or drop them off, or they're seeking medical attention and, the hospital wants to call interpretation, so they call ICE instead. So putting into perspective that, like, that fear in general, like with an immigrant thinking or knowing that they, one, might be stopped at a traffic, scenario, or they might get into a situation by like a place like a hospital.
Imagine, and then you avoid the hospital because you're scared if you don't seek medical attention, and then
there's so much fear. You live in the shadows. You're scared to go. I've seen so many scenarios of where like, a person will have like a miscarriage and not show up to the hospital like alone on their own just because they don't want to get in this situation, or like the family separations happen that way too. It's like sometimes our farm workers, those who feed us, those who work tirelessly, and though some folks may say, or some of these people are undocumented New Yorkers, immigrant New Yorkers, contribute $3.1 billion in taxes, federal, local, and state. Just undocumented immigrants in New York State. Imagine.
And to the other point of, the fear of immigration and different things like that, for that to be the narrative, the amount our economy relies on, or even our food system rely on, literally undocumented workers, you would think they would create some sort of faster solution or pipeline for people if that's the type of labor that they need.
Well, the documentation of those workers, like if we give folks work authorization, and I'm talking just from an economic perspective, not even a human-centered one, the tax contributions will rise from $3.1 to $4 billion. And mind you, I also want to highlight, now that we're
gets that.
Right, yeah. Now that we're talking about economy, like the resources that go into police and enforcement enforcement and ICE colluding, where does the resources and money come from? It comes from our local tax dollars. So that's another thing to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm. And so it's like almost counterintuitive. Like you're putting more resources into policing. So population and workforce adding to our local economy, and taxpayer dollars end by just actually contribution in like labor. So it's just really and the scarcity mindset of, well, there's not enough already or things like that, when that's how much there's a contribution, especially in terms of taxpayer dollars. It's such a weak argument, you know?
And there's another piece to think about too, and it points to one of our other legislative priorities. There's a budget component to it as well, and that's access to representation.
Yeah.
So when you touch U.S. soil, you can apply for asylum legal status a year from when you are here. The shortage of legal service providers makes that very hard. And so, you know, what we want with passing access to representation is making sure immigration court, like other courts, has access to representation for folks, because folks often have to represent themselves alone, but also creating a pipeline to train lawyers and create capacity for legal service providers so folks can have documentation.
Absolutely. And that's another way in which that the immigration system itself is actually broken. And so a lot of people, the argument is like, oh, we'll come the right way. And it's like, the right way, it takes over a decade. And if I don't have a lawyer and there's no lawyers available, then how am I supposed to do it? And will I even get in front of a judge with my proper representation? And there's all these question marks, to the point where like even young kids have to represent themselves because they don't know how, like, the way we have public defenders as American citizens, it's asinine to me that that's not the system in which the immigration court system operates. Because we all know that you can't go through the legal system on your own. No citizens can, or anyone can, resident. So it's just kind of, I don't know why. You know, I think there's a lot of complaints about all of the issues and different things like that, but it's like, okay, well then we have solutions.
Yes.
You know, and so the hesitancy to actually implement them is what kind of grinds my gears.
And that's why our priority is, for one, to keep families safe, because like you said, there's a lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric, right? And there always has been, I think, since like beginning of times.
Absolutely.
But keeping our community safe and our families together is the primary, right? These folks do give to the economy, but they also have lives here. They've built roots here. They have their family here. Family separations are so traumatic and painful, and they are why two-year-olds sometimes have to present themselves in front of immigration courts alone. But yeah, like passing New York for All would be huge for our community safety. And just like, you know, we're not the first. New York City has like very strong laws to protect folks, but New York State in general has to be a sanctuary state in order everyone feels safe. And for folks to not be in dangerous situations and not seek help from police or from hospitals. And I want you to think a little bit about the nuance that we talked about earlier in these situations where, like, let's say you are someone who is, you know, afraid of deportation, but you also have a domestic violence situation at play, right? Will you be comfortable talking to the police and seeking protection? So thinking about those nuances, and then thinking about what ways can we make immigration safe and easy, and make sure folks are not scared in our society.
And I think this ties in so much with the episode we did last week on community responders, which is like alternatives to punitive and police intervention for basic community need. You know, making safe communities doesn't equate extra policing.
Yes.
And so I just love that you're highlighting all of these initiatives that are reimagining and creating, as my colleague Colleen said last week on community responders, a paradigm shift in how we are thinking about community safety and what does that actually mean, and how is it executed. And I just appreciate you so much for coming on the show today and to talk about just the different ways that we can reimagine how we're keeping our community safe.
And there is a statistic, Deja, about you all, about how places that do incorporate these sanctuary laws have a lower crime rate.
Yeah, because when you make communities unsafe like that, all it does is push people to the edge. You know what I mean? When you make people desperate, when you make them fearful, what people don't seek help, what else are they going to do? You know what I'm saying? Well, there are alternatives out there. What other way am I going to make money other than under the table or whatever? If you're refusing to give me working papers or anything like that, I mean, how else is it going to operate if all of our systems are broken, really? So I appreciate you kind of highlighting and talking about what solutions actually are. Because I think even the solutions we're talking about aren't just, for our benefit or for immigrants' benefit or anything like that, but for some of the counter talking points of people against immigration or different things like that, or who are fearful. A lot of these solutions also solve those concerns. You know what I mean? That's the biggest thing is like, yeah, we agree. Like, yeah, there's this problem. It's not, for the reason you think it is, but this could solve that. You know what I mean? So how can we find that common ground with others who may or may not have maybe a little bit of a different viewpoint or a perspective coming into it, but realizing that in the end, we all want the same thing, which is safe, healthy homes, families, society, access to healthcare, access to education. I just think if we focus on those core values, that I don't think many people could disagree with that.
Yeah. If we can imagine a society where none of our communities are a target or is scapegoated for, failings that we can come together as a community and work towards, right? There's more positive ways that we can, focus on certain problems and solve them.
Yeah. Solving them together, I think, is the main.
100%.
Yeah.
And not being okay with another person being demonized or vilified. It is often the very vulnerable, which I find very interesting, that are vilified. And when you think about communities we were taught to fear, it is often the most vulnerable person that don't have a chance or capacity to hurt anyone. But yeah.
Absolutely. And on that note of, working together to solve problems, I think this is exactly the type of topic that I wanted to discuss after, I think a lot of people are a little hopeless right now. And, the fight is always continuing. I mean, the work is here and the work needs to be done and we're going to keep doing it. And I just want people to know that exists. There's opportunity. There's always more that we can be doing, and we just have to keep at it, So I just thank you so much for coming on the show today, bringing your positive sunshine and perspectives. And, I just really appreciate the conversation that we had, because I want people to really reimagine the way they talk about even issues that they feel like they may be educated on already, and think about it a little bit differently. And
I would also love, when people hear this, to think about the ways they can get involved. When you're not an impacted person, especially with immigration issues, oftentimes immigrants cannot advocate for themselves because of fear of loss of status, because of all the previous fears we discussed. And I think thinking of yourself as a community member, if you care about a topic like this, how can I be involved? There's a plethora of ways. Obviously, through the New York Immigration Coalition, we often mobilize, we organize folks, we have trainings, we have the Know Your Rights resources and the community toolkits, but also we have local orgs that are our members who do the work on the ground locally as well, and help us push that state legislation and shape it even and localize it and make it relevant. But those are other ways they could get involved, whether by donations or mobilizing or being a pen pal or this or that. There are so many ways. And I really hope, I'm going to say people can reach out to me directly and I can guide you in either avenues, or you can, take that journey and discover that on your own. But there are ways to help.
Yeah, and I'll make sure to put Hagar's information and NYC's contact in the description, wherever you're watching this, whether it be a YouTube short, the YouTube full video, Instagram, Facebook, whatever. We'll make sure you have information to be able to tap back into New York Immigration Coalition and Hagar. I thank you so much for being on the show today, Bar. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. This has been The Public Good with Deja Jams. We are so excited to come to you every Tuesday on any platform you can get your podcast and on our YouTube page, PPG Buffalo. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.